Journalism and politics are like peanut butter and jelly. They just go together naturally. Today, we have journalism professor Dr. Chris Martin and the head of the UNI Political Science Department, Dr. Scott Peters, as well as a special guest student who is deeply involved in student government, Sam Coffrin. I'm your host, Jacob Butler, and all that and more is coming up right here on At UNI. Welcome to the show, Dr. Peters and Dr. Martin.
Thank you. Good to be
here.
Nice
to be here.
So I want to start with Chris. Can you tell us about your background and what you do here at UNI?
My background, if you're going to go way far back, I'm originally from Columbus, Ohio, but I've been teaching here at UNI for the most part since 1995, and I teach digital journalism, so lots of classes about writing and things like that.
All right. Can you tell us a little bit about the Northern Iowan?
Yeah, the Northern Iowan. It's UNI's newspaper for more than 130 years. I'm on the board that oversees the Northern Iowan, but more recently, in the past couple of years, I've been an advisor to them. So it's the first time we've been more, in some ways, affiliated with the journalism program here. So it's still an independent paper, and that's really important. But we're also trying to make connections between what we teach in journalism and what happens at the newspaper. And I think it's actually had a good effect on the paper in the past couple of years.
Do you think that form of print media will eventually die off? And how is the Northern Iowa preparing if such a thing does happen?
Yeah, I always address that when we talk with the student fee committee about, which gives us some of our funding for the newspaper. I keep saying, and it's been kind of a moving goalpost, but like in the next 10 years or so, it's likely that we won't have a print paper, but we have a pretty robust digital side to it with a website. We have a newsletter that goes out weekly. We're involved in social media. We have an app. So we print twice a week. It's likely that at some point when the ad dollars for the print side aren't covering the cost of printing, we'll start to roll back maybe just once a week and then maybe at some point go completely digital.
Do you think that digital, in like the general global sense of journalism, do you think that digital is going to be the way to go?
I think so. I think there's a number of universities that have already gone that way because of expenses. Some daily newspapers, like at Iowa and Iowa State, they're daily, but they actually just print twice a week as well. So we're thinking more and more about ourselves as just a digital presence online. And I think, at least in terms of our analytics, that's where most people are getting our news these days too. So it's actually been heartening to see that the interest in journalism itself is not going down, but maybe just in terms of picking up the actual paper version of the newspaper.
So now to shift gears a little bit, Scott, can you tell us about your background and what you do here at UNI?
Sure. I grew up in the St. Louis area. I've been here at UNI since 2003, so I guess this is my 20th year here. I teach classes on the courts. This semester, for example, I'm teaching a class called Law, Politics, and Society that examines trial courts and how they shape our lives. I'm also the head of the Department of Political Science, so oversee that department administratively. That's a pretty active department. A lot of faculty who are out there doing presentations in public, appearing on Iowa Public Radio. Very engaged faculty and an active students as well, lots of student organizations.
I see. What sort of challenges do you see those students facing in a very polarized world, and how has that changed over the last few years?
Yeah, I mean, I think anybody who just sort of pays attention to politics knows that polarization has increased, and we see students, I think, who come to us who are affected by that polarization, not quite knowing how to talk to other people about controversial issues, not quite knowing how to respond when students disagree with them, or being a little nervous about asserting themselves for fear that others in the classroom might disagree with them. We're definitely seeing that. I think probably almost everybody who teaches across the university, who teaches any kind of controversial issues, probably see that. In political science, one thing that we try to do is analyze things from a slightly different perspective. So when we talk about issues, a lot of times we're not necessarily encouraging students to talk about their own views on issues. It's fine if they do, but what we're trying to teach students is to develop tools to analyze these issues from a variety of perspectives. And so that sometimes helps in the classroom when we talk about those issues. The other thing we're trying to do is to help students just be able to talk across differences, because if students can talk across very difficult differences like political ones, that will help them as they go out to whatever comes next for them, graduate programs, the workplace, or whatever, because we continue to have to negotiate all kinds of differences in our lives, whether it's personal differences with friends and family members or professional differences with coworkers.
So like I said in the intro, press and politics go together like peanut butter and jelly. So how would either of you say that relationship has changed over the last few years between the press and the politics?
Boy, I mean, if we go back long enough, we see, I don't know, in some ways, and Chris might be able to speak even more to this, but in some ways, we see some patterns kind of repeating themselves. So, for example, if we were to go back to the founding of this country, we had a very partisan, polarized press. If people think things are nasty now, they should go back and read some of the things that Thomas Jefferson wrote under a pseudonym about John Adams, who was supposedly one of his best friends at the time. We've gone through eras of a very partisan press, through the development of, a more supposed objective press in the middle part of the 20th century. And now we have kind of both of those things. I would say that the biggest difference today is the sheer amount of information that's out there and the ability to avoid information we don't like. I don't know what
How about
Chris would
you,
have to
Chris?
say about that.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, when you look through history, sometimes we get so stuck on the moment we're in that we don't think like this has happened over 200 years in the United States. I mean, one thing that's a little bit interesting, and we see it right now in the case that's developing by Dominion, the voting machine company, against Fox News, is that it's pretty clear that a good chunk of the conservative media that's developed is inherently partisan. I mean, that's part of their mission, which is different, although some people would disagree with this, but it's different from the traditional mainstream journalism and what their purpose was, which tries to be, as Scott said, objective and kind of non-biased and non-partisan. So that's kind of a different development that I write about it in some of my research. Going all the way back to the 1960s. That the idea that people on the right didn't feel like the mainstream press was on their side, although the mainstream press would argue they're not supposed to be on anyone's side, but they wanted to develop a specific conservative press in support of their positions.
So kind of to go off of that, what are some changes that either of you would like to see in that relationship? And maybe let's start with Chris.
I'd like to see, all press be press that would be nonpartisan. And we've always had, journals of opinion, and that's fine. But that's based in reality, in fact. I mean, when we have, some journalism talking about things, and it's on the right and some on the left too, where they're talking about things that just clearly are not true. I mean, that's not good. That's not good for any of us. It's not good for democracy as well.
And then how about you, Scott?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I don't know how we get back to those kinds of norms in the short term, though. The financial incentive is so great for these institutions that have been created, and we're seeing this in the emails and the various communications that have been released in that Dominion lawsuit against Fox News. We have Fox journalists and executives saying explicitly, our viewership won't accept this. If we report the truth, what we know to be the truth, our viewership won't accept it, and we will lose viewers to these more extreme, Newsmax kinds of sites. Fox is, when you look at the hours it devotes to its programming, it's heavily opinion based. And personality based, but there is still embedded within it, there is still sort of a hard news element to Fox News. Websites like Newsmax have none of that. There's not even a pretense to any sort of traditional journalistic standards. And so you see them being pressured by the fact that their viewership won't accept the kind of traditional journalistic standards. So I don't know. Maybe the lawsuit will be enough financial pressure to push them back the other direction, but I'm not sure it will.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. Well, coming up next, we'll discuss some controversy that struck the UNI campus 3 years ago when UNI President Mark Nook struck down a ruling issued by the UNI student government and the reactions from both the press and political sides of campus. But first, an important public service announcement.
Victor deployed for the first time to Afghanistan in 2003. At 4 in the morning, my phone rang. They said, "I regret to inform you that your husband was wounded in action." Victor sustained a moderate traumatic brain injury. I was doing school full-time, and I was also then caring for Victor. One of the most important elements of caregiving is taking care of yourself. I just didn't want to forget that I also had goals and that I also had a life. What I did is I challenged Victor to meet me halfway. He asked all his therapists to help him undertake some of the house chores. There are almost 6 million military and veteran caregivers across the nation. We have our own journey, and we can fulfill that journey at the same time that we are helping our loved one.
Visit aarp.org/caregiving for a free military veterans guide to navigate your caregiving journey.
Welcome back to At UNI. We have Dr. Scott Peters and Dr. Chris Martin here with us today. Scott, a few years ago, there was a proposed student organization on campus called Students for Life that the UNI student government shut down before President Nook stepped in and overruled that decision. I won't ask for your opinion on the Students for Life organization itself, but did that affect your political science department in any way?
I'm not sure that it did. I mean, we had some political science majors who were on the student government at the time. So in that sense, we had, I think we had students coming and talking to us about it and seeking our advice about it. But I don't know. I would say that's the only way it really affected us.
Real quick, can you explain what exactly political science is for the audience?
Sure. In political science, we use the scientific method. We use social science methods to investigate politics. So I like to think of politics as about cooperation and conflict, and in particular, the role of power and government in mediating that cooperation and conflict. And so what we do is, rather than just opining about politics and rather than taking statements about politics at face value, we gather data and we test hypotheses about causes and effects of political science. We test theories about why people behave the way they do or why institutions do what they do. So, for example, I study the courts. Just because a judge says they decide a case in a particular way, we're not going to take that statement at face value. We're going to gather data about how judges cast or how judges vote in particular cases. We're going to look for patterns, and we're going to see, for example, that judges' ideology affects their decision making. So that's just one example.
Yeah, interesting. So going back to the UNI Students for Life, Chris, did that event and the subsequent national media coverage affect the Northern Iowan at all, or did you use it as a teaching moment for your students?
It fits in with what we try to teach in journalism, that journalism's a discipline of verification. So you go through the process, you check things out, and you value all perspectives and opinions, but it has to be very much fact-based. I think it was, in terms of the case itself, I think it was a good call by President Nook. There was a process that was set up for how organizations become official student organizations, and I think you have to follow that process, regardless of how you feel about something. So that's kind of the connection I made with journalism students. You have to write and report about something regardless about how you feel about that thing, because you're thinking about what's the information I need to bring to a broader audience.
Well, to change gears a little bit, we have your book here. It's called Framed Labor and the Corporate Media. Can you tell us about it and also the follow-up book?
Yeah, I wrote this book, Framed Labor in the Corporate Media, about 20 years ago. And it was about, it's actually based on some of my dissertation work at University of Michigan, but it's really about how stories in the news media are framed, hence the title, by stories about labor in the working class. So I looked at things like, a GM plant shutdown, a UPS strike, a Major League Baseball strike, and things like that. And what I argued is that those stories are mostly less about work and the work conditions and more about how those things affect consumers. So for example, if there's a flight attendant strike, the news media tends to be much more apt to talk to passengers in the airport that didn't get on flights and why they're angry, rather than talking to flight attendants and why they're actually striking and how that might connect to citizens as well. So that was what that book was about. The other book, the No Longer Newsworthy, How the Mainstream Media Abandoned the Working Class, kind of tries to figure out the history of why that coverage has happened, and also why working class people now feel kind of alienated by the media.
Would you say that those books have kind of changed your outlook on your career?
I think so. I mean, on one hand, I'm like, when people want to talk to someone who looks at this specific niche, I mean, they oftentimes, come looking for me. But it's helped me think through, like, why, why our politics are the way they are today, the relationship between politics and the media and the working class. So it's really helped me kind of figure some things out.
Well, if you want to know more about journalism at UNI, a letter to the editor of the Northern Iowan will always get a response. Thanks for coming on the show, Dr. Chris Martin. Coming up next, we have a student who is getting involved in campus government and a segment about a local Cedar Valley business. Let's check it out.
My name is Matt Roanhorst. I own Artisan Ceiling Systems and Acoustical Specialties in Waterloo, Iowa. A lot of people, when they're thinking about starting a business, they're just thinking about the logistics. Okay, how do I do this legally? What insurance do I need and all that? And that's fine, you need to figure that stuff out, but there's a lot of professionals that can help you with that kind of thing, and honestly, it's really not that hard. Focus on what the business is going to be about. If you're going to build widgets, figure out how to build the best widget there is. If you're going to be an electrician, be the best electrician there is. So what really drew me to being a business owner is that there wasn't any real limit on what I could do, how much money I could make. It's a little more than just buying something for $1 and selling it for $2. You're building an organization. It actually gets to be kind of fun building this thing. It doesn't matter if you're a plumber or you're, doing some high-tech thing. I mean, it has high points and low points like anything else, but when it's working, it's really satisfying and really rewarding.
Our next guest is Sam Coffrin, a UNI student deeply involved in student government. Welcome to the show, Sam.
Yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity.
So as a student here at UNI in political science and public administration, what can you tell us about your aspirations as a student and beyond?
So as a student, I mainly want to continue my understanding in how the government functions. My double major, public administration and political science, allows me to understand the regular civics like you would receive at high school government classes, but also I have the public administration part and the political science part, which is more theory, getting into theories of politics, what is justice, what is liberty, what is power. But also I have a legal studies minor, which allows me to get involved into the legality aspect, Supreme Court, the judicial branch, different aspects of government. So I kind of a little bit of each going on there. So beyond being a student, I'm involved in local politics. I have been on the 2020 election. I was involved in the a county party platform committee, and overall just encouraging students to get involved in local politics and in their civic engagement.
Well, in addition to local politics, I also know you're involved in student politics. So how did that start? How did you get? In all honesty, I came to UNI. I didn't exactly know what kind of student government they had. We had student senate in high school, and I was involved in that. But when I was actually voluntold, is what we call it in student government. I was voluntold by the not the previous president, but the president before that, Ellie Bodine, to get involved in student government here at UNI, Northern Iowa Student Government. And so I applied and became an at-large senator. I know that you recently ran for student government president. What
That's
was
accurate.
your platform?
So our platform, Christelle, my VP's candidate's platform, was making a pact with UNI students. So that's presence, advocacy, campus life, and transparency. Those were the 4 main foundations of our platform. We had a wide range of initiatives we wanted to work on, but we had a large focus on enhancing our engagement with our fraternity and sorority life on campus, as well as our engagement with domestic student engagement with the international office here on campus.
So going off of that, could you tell us about your current job with student government?
So currently, I am the Speaker of the Senate, not Speaker of the House. There's been a confusion there. Speaker of the Senate. I preside over the Senate meetings. I lead the Senate meetings, make sure we're abiding by Robert's Rules of Order, making sure we're getting through the legislative business that we need to get through, and ensuring the senators are doing their jobs as well. I'm in charge of attendance. I have Senate one-on-ones that I hold with senators monthly to check in on how their initiatives are going, and I also represent the Senate in the upper cabinet. I sit on the upper cabinet. It's a large committee made up of the multiple directors that make up the higher executive branch. And I also serve on a multitude of different committees, university committees, one of the most important ones, I believe, being the President's Budget Advisory Committee.
So you already touched on your responsibilities, but what are some unique aspects of your job that people might not expect?
Might not expect. It's just it's a strange position to be in, considering you're the sole leader of one branch, is most important. It's like, I am the sole leader of the legislative branch. I am in charge of making sure that basically the bills that give student organizations their funding and give student orgs their recognition get to the Senate floor and get voted on. So I assist with that process. I'm a significant factor when it comes to how quickly those bills get to the floor and how quickly the student orgs can receive their funding and get recognition. So I think that's one surprising thing. Yeah.
So you sound like you've coordinated a lot of things on campus. What are some of your accomplishments as a student politician here at UNI?
Some of my accomplishments. Students now can, their student IDs, the identification cards, no longer have to be your legal name. They can now be the preferred name you put in on My Universe. I was very proud to initiate the menstrual products initiative on campus as well. I was also very, very proud to collaborate with our ex-president Samantha Bennett on the mental health professional for student athletes housed in the Wellness and Recreation Center. It has made a lot of progress to having a part-time in-house mental health professional. However, we are still trying to reach a full-time in-house mental health professional that has facilities connected to the counseling services program here on campus.
Well, those are some impressive accomplishments. Before we wrap up today, we have a public service announcement and another few questions for Scott and Stam. Stay tuned after this break.
If I could be you, and you could be me for just 1 hour. If we could find a way to get inside each other's minds. If you could see you through my eyes instead of your ego, I believe you'd be surprised to see that you've been blind. Walk a mile in my shoes. Walk a mile in my shoes. Yeah, before you abuse, criticize and accuse. Walk a mile in my shoes. Walk a mile in my shoes. Well, before you abuse, criticize and accuse. Walk a mile in my shoes.
Welcome back to At UNI. We have a few more questions before we wrap up today. Scott, I know your research interest is in state Supreme Court elections, specifically the various ethical restrictions that are placed on judicial candidates. Can you tell us more about your research and what exactly that all means?
Sure. Most people are probably familiar with the way we select judges at the federal level, appointed by the president, confirmed by the Senate. But very few states do things that way. States differ quite a bit in how they select judges and then what judges have to do to stay in office. And many states hold competitive, contested elections for state courts, including their highest court, their state Supreme Court. But judicial judicial campaigns are still a little bit different than campaigns for other offices. So in some ways they're similar. Judges and judicial candidates have to raise money, they have to campaign, they produce commercials, they may hold campaign rallies and other things like that. And yet we don't want judges who make such specific promises on the campaign trail that it calls into question whether they can be impartial when a case is in front of them. And so because there are these expectations about how judges should behave on the bench, there are also expectations about what they can or how they can and can't say things off the bench. And so essentially I study how the various regulations on judicial campaigning influence the outcomes of elections and whether they are actually effective at influencing the messages that candidates use when they campaign.
So kind of in a similar sense, Sam, can you talk about what the campaign process is like for student government here?
It is not as polarized and as mudslinging, we shall say, as national, federal, and state elections. So you do have to do regular campaigning to get on the legitimate ballot. You have a week before. You have a week of collecting signatures to actually get on the ballot. It usually takes place about 2 weeks before the actual election days. Once you're on the ballot, then you can engage in regular campaigning. It is much different campaigning for a Senate seat compared to the president and the vice presidency. The Senate seats are much more relaxed when it comes to campaigning. You have to get votes from constituents within your college compared to the president and vice presidency, where you have to get a certain amount of signatures and votes from the community, the colleges at large, as well as the graduate college, as well as students that are majors that are like exploratory or those oddball majors. So you have to collect specific signatures from them and then get votes from the entire campus as a whole. Campaigning for president and vice president is a lot more rigorous. What's become a more common tradition, I will say, is that meet and greets with student orgs, going to student organization meetings and trying to earn your vote, their vote, campaigning that way.
Interesting. Question for both of you. What are some of your favorite career moments here at UNI? Maybe we'll start with Scott.
Favorite career moments? I mean, I guess for me, the thing is watching students succeed. So if I think about things over the years, it's usually particular student accomplishments, seeing them go on to whatever's next for them, hearing from them after they've gone on to whatever's next and seeing what they're doing. I think in the political science department, we're pretty conscious of the fact that a lot of our graduates go on to be leaders in their communities. That sometimes that means running for office, but sometimes it means that they're on the boards of nonprofits that deliver important services, or it means that they're working behind the scenes in a lot of ways to make change in their communities. And so hearing about what they're doing and how they're impacting their communities is very rewarding.
And then Sam, you already touched on your accomplishments as a student politician here on campus, but what about like accomplishments within your career field of political science and public administration?
I think just in general, I enjoy being able to have conversations not only in the classroom but outside the classroom about ongoings within governments that maybe we have a deeper understanding of because of the educational field that we're in, because of the field that we're studying. I am now more inclined to analyze things as a political scientist, which I find a lot more helpful to understand the deeper connotations of decisions made by legislative bodies or by the judicial branch. And I think I think that's pretty amazing, and I think that's a pretty big achievement, is being able to have that deeper level of understanding. And then challenging my own beliefs has been a huge accomplishment in this field. Allowing myself to open my mind and challenge the way I think and the way I thought things were has also been a huge achievement, I believe, personally.
We want to thank Sam Coffrin and Dr. Scott Peters for joining us on the show today, and thank you to Dr. Chris Martin for joining us earlier. Coming up on next week's episode, At UNI is all about the movies. We hope you can join us then.
When I never graduated from high school, I realized I wanted to go back to school because I didn't want to work these back-breaking jobs the rest of my life. With the help of my father and having my son, that was all the motivation that I needed to come back to school. I felt accomplished, made me feel that I could take on whatever challenges life throws at you.
Find free adult education classes near you at finishyourdiploma.org.